Do you know the easiest way to make fire using just two sticks? Hi, I'm Angel. Welcome to the Authentic Action Podcast, where we dive deep into various topics. And today we're diving into the topic of self-love, gratitude, and appreciation, being that tomorrow is Thanksgiving here in the U.S. Um, Before I move on, I want to mention our sponsors, the Authentic Action Academy, where we are setting up a new community over in the school community. That's SKOOL. Come over and check it out right now. It's free to join. Pretty soon it might not be. So check it out while it's still free. And our other sponsor, Sleeping Dragons Company, where you can find hard to find essential oils, rare herbs, and other items designed to help facilitate your own healing and self-love journey. Awaken your creative spirit with Sleeping Dragons Company. Onward and upward to today's topic. As I mentioned, today's topic is self-love. And I know this has sort of become a buzzword lately. It's a popular topic, but tomorrow being Thanksgiving, I was thinking about talking about gratitude, and that led me to think about the difference between gratitude and appreciation and thanks or thankfulness. And they could, in some contexts, certainly be used interchangeably, but also there are subtle, nuanced differences in those words. So I want to dive into that a little bit. Um, and even though I believe that appreciation and gratitude are sort of on a spectrum, and they're also perhaps two different flavors of the broader scope of what we might call love or positivity. Um, I think there's always room for improvement. I think it's an ongoing journey. And so I want to share some of that, my own personal journey in that with you in the hopes that perhaps it can help you in your own journey of self-love and appreciation. So, I want to tell you the story of how I improved my life by learning how to love myself and really how to really feel true appreciation for my body's own healing capacity. And this actually is rooted in my own struggles with autoimmune diseases of various names ever since pre-puberty. I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, chronic urticaria, which is fancy for hives, and um, yeah, just generally had a hard time of it in many ways. Was told I wouldn't live to be 50. At one point, I was diagnosed with lupus, but then they took that back. Right now, I have Hashimoto's as a label. I'm using air quotes, even though that's not really appropriate. But there are many labels for many diseases. And through my own healing journey, I have come to really appreciate that none of those are actually really the sum. They're just descriptors, sort of like tape with marker writing on them. They might help a little, but they don't really tell you all that much about what's really going on. And why that is relevant to my own journey of self-appreciation is that it's been in these waves or these layers or these iterations of me learning how to appreciate myself more effectively, more efficiently. I think this is where it gets into the nuance between appreciating and being grateful or expressing gratitude. So let me back up just a little bit before I dive too far into that rabbit hole of my story and give you a little bit of a definition of how I'm thinking about these terms, which again are just terms, they're just labels, and you might disagree with how I'm thinking about them, but for the purposes of this conversation, I want to share how I'm thinking about them. So to me, appreciation is is a broader context type of thing and is an internal well, I hesitate there because you can express your appreciation for someone like you can express your gratitude for someone or to someone, and then it becomes like an externally moving energy. Um, I often feel a sense of appreciation for things, even if I don't feel completely positive about those things. In fact, a lot of times I use a story of or a feeling of appreciation as a way of reminding myself to get the good parts of what I might otherwise feel like are hard lessons in life. And this is a skill, really, that I've cultivated throughout my life and that I continue to try to cultivate because it serves me well. Um, And gratitude is a little more positive, a little more narrowly focused to me than appreciation. Like I can appreciate that someone is a bad person, even not just like in a way that I have a sense of like I'm glad that's there, that kind of appreciation. And in a grand scheme of things, I appreciate all things. I think all things are valuable in their own way, even if they're like that bad example kind of way, from my perspective. Um, but also there's an appreciation. It's closer related to what happens to an asset when it gains value. So, um, I can add value to something in my own story, in my own framework, regardless or irregardless of whether that is looking like a positive or a negative. And to be fair, it is generally more challenging when it seems like a negative. And in that regard, it's also more of an invitation, so it almost becomes easier or more natural because when I realize that I am criticizing something or feeling negatively about it, feeling like it's not an asset, like it's a liability, then if I can appreciate it for what it is, for whatever role it is serving, sometimes that takes a little more contemplation and examination of what that role might be and, how something is serving me in particular and the broader scope of society and everything in between. Um, and thankfulness is really like about saying thank you, right? Like it's related to both of those things, gratitude and appreciation. But again, I think there's a little bit of a distinction, and sometimes thankfulness, and maybe to a slightly lesser extent, but still a little bit sometimes, um, gratitude can have a little bit of like a weight to it or a heaviness to it or I'm like when somebody says, here you go, you might feel obligated to say thank you. And then sometimes there's like a heaviness to that or a stickiness to it. It's not really a lightness or a feeding or, yeah, it can be almost a closer to a neutral than a positive sometimes because of that, like a counterweight, it feels like. So there you have a somewhat brief rundown of how I'm thinking about these different, differently nuanced terms: appreciation, gratitude, and thankfulness or thanks. So back to my story about how I improved my life by learning to love myself a little bit more and feel true appreciation for my own body's healing capacity. And probably not ironic or not coincidentally, that the biggest waves of that have happened when I'm struggling with significant injury and or a flare up of this chronic disease that I've been struggling with throughout most of my life. Um, and the first time that comes to mind that I remember really starting to make a distinction about expressing my appreciation for my body's healing capacity out loud to my body, which started to get me thinking about this difference between gratitude and appreciation and the expression of all those things, was when I had cracked some ribs and I was having to lay flat on my back to sleep. I was, especially the first few weeks of that, it was every breath was a little bit scary. The level of anxiety in my body was extremely high all the time. And a lot of my life, I've lived with a lot of anxiety, chronic PTSD, complex PTSD, and, a lot of the symptoms of a lot of trauma in my earlier life and in my more recent life, I would dare say, or I would venture to say, or I would go ahead and say, I'm going to say for the record. Um, so I'm not always cognizant of the subtleties of feelings in my body, and it's taken me a lot of work, and it's still, again, an ongoing process for me to get more in touch with what's really going on in my body, what my body's trying to tell me. So I can easily mistake feelings of anxiety for feelings of excitement. And you might hear a lot of entrepreneurs and success gurus talking about doing that deliberately. And I do think that can be a good strategy to overcome nervousness and stress, to replace that with excitement. Um, However, little pinky finger asterisk, I like to say, if you're already struggling with trauma, or PTSD, or it just might be worth thinking a little bit about before you dive really wholly into that methodology, that when we when we override our body's signals, or when we just change them up without like going underneath and doing the work that we need to do to really like reprogram ourselves, if instead we're just sort of trying to lay over a new program without getting underneath that superficial layer, we can end up causing, delay, or one might say more harm than good, by creating more trauma in the body. Because when we tell ourselves something that we don't believe is true in a way that's not convincing, we can just lose trust with ourselves. So I wanted to mention that because that's a really important caveat. And I've erred on both sides. I've done it right and I've done it wrong. So I haven't fully figured out the secret equation to how to always do it right and never do it wrong. But I can say that it's worth exploring what you're doing that's making you able to do the shifting right, and what's getting in the way when it goes wrong. And let me back up and say what that shifting is does feel sometimes like a little bit of a lie, because it's acting as if it's it's not a new concept at all, the whole fake it till you make it kind of a concept. And it's acting as if you love yourself, even if you don't really love yourself. until you start to really love yourself. It's acting as if you really appreciate your body. And by acting, I say, n- I mean treating yourself as if you love yourself, which is worthy of some contemplation. And also saying loving. So all the ways, words of affirmation, gifts, touch, um, giving yourself a break, grace, any way that you can think of that you might extend showing love and appreciation to another person can be a great way to show love and appreciation to yourself. And I do recommend going through some exercises of exploring that. In my book that I'm working on, The Shift, Own Your Emotions, Own Your Life is my current working title and subtitle. Has some great, it's a collection of tools, really. It has some tools specifically for how to cultivate that sense of self-love and appreciation, even or perhaps especially when you're not really feeling it at first. In fact, self-loathing, which is like on the far end of the spectrum from self-love and appreciation, is probably the biggest thing that I have struggled with personally in this lifetime, and the biggest thing that I see people around me struggling with, my clients and my friends and family, and just in strangers out in the street. So, this is why I bring the topic to the table. I think it's a very important topic. I think you, all of us benefit when we share tools that are effective and also just take more time to pause and think about and perhaps uh, share ideas about how to do it right more of the time and how to do it wrong less of the time. And again, I'll mention tomorrow is Thanksgiving Day here in the States and probably in other places in typical American fashion. I don't really know much about other places. I know a little about a little. I'm still always trying to learn. I didn't mean that to sound the way it did. But anyway, let's go into back to the story of how I improved my life. And I was laying there every night, just trying to breathe deeply in and breathe deeply out. And with every breath, trying to practice cultivating appreciation and sending that appreciation to parts of my body, especially to the parts. And I'm kind of pointing over here where I had some cracked ribs and just a lot of pain, a lot of question, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of mistrust that had been built up in my body and then, literally smashed into like a stagnant, like so much that it was hard to take a full breath for several months, really. But as I mentioned, those first few weeks were particularly painful. And in those weeks, though, is when I learned a new level of how to love myself and appreciate myself. So it's one of those stories of like, would I wish it on anyone? Absolutely not. Would I change it? I'm not sure. Would I go back and not have that experience? Probably not. Not that I'm probably glad I don't have to make that choice because it would be a difficult one because the outcome of that experience has been a much deeper sense of self-love and appreciation and an appreciation for myself and my body, and also an appreciation for some of the tools and techniques that I'm sharing in this book. One of those being talking to your body out loud, expressing gratitude and appreciation to your body out loud. So, even though it was a very challenging and painful experience, in the long run, it helped me to learn appreciation and gratitude on a new level, on a new frequency. I up leveled that capacity in myself. I do think that gratitude and appreciation and thankfulness are all shades or flavors of love, as I mentioned earlier, and therefore can all be used as like super turbocharger tools for up leveling our frequency in life in general. And there are many, many, many leaders and teachers out there who talk about using gratitude practices as a regular tool for up leveling your whole life, really, your health, your wellness, of course, being first and foremost on the whole spectrum of things that matter in this life and help you do everything else. Um, and even though it's a supercharger and we all know that like we love is great and all that, sometimes it's easier with others than it is with ourselves because of this self-loathing tendency that I mentioned. And ultimately, we're all one. So sometimes it can be easier with ourselves, and sometimes it can be easier with others. And in both cases, it works. Like wherever you start, it helps elevate the other side of that equation. So, um, how we feel about ourselves will be projected onto others, and how we see others is a reflection of how we see ourselves. And so, if we back to this idea of fake it till you make it, or I like the phrase act as if, because it's getting at the same idea. There's acting might not be it might not be, it might be an act. It might be fake at first, or sometimes it might not be completely genuine. Um, and other times it might, like when you act, it's the root of taking action, right? So it's how you're acting in the moment. And again, uh, acting as if you love yourself is really like whether you really do or you really don't in that moment, it's the acting as if that's really going to add up, I think, the quickest and the bestest and the mostest to having a positive effect. And even if you haven't experienced that, or even if you've experienced it a lot but right now you're not experiencing that sense of self-love and instead you're over on the self-loathing side, or maybe just a little bit down on yourself, um, if you keep giving into that self-loathing thought pattern, it will cascade, it will spiral down, and your default mode will become in this lower frequency, and you will draw other lower frequency interactions into your life, and you will spiral the drain, as some people say. And conversely, if you practice regularly appreciation and gratitude, and expressing appreciation and gratitude by saying thank you to your body, to other people, to really, really start to see it as any place you can take that opportunity to genuinely say thank you to someone. You're not giving them a gift, even though perhaps you are, but you're also giving yourself the gift of cultivating that practice. And the more you cultivate that practice in yourself, the more you're going to spiral your default mode network upwards. You're going to elevate your frequency, and you're going to draw more elevated frequency experiences into your own life experiences, and you're going to have a better life. Um, it really is that simple. And it really is a huge, profound difference that can make in a life. The difference between saying thank you and not saying thank you at all, or saying something negative, um, is profound. And as another pinky finger asterisk that I want to mention, something that's come up a lot in my personal conversations is about our conversations with, well, with AI, and our virtual assistants these days, which a lot of people think it's silly to say please and thank you to those things that we don't think have any feelings. And even if they don't, and they never do, a lot of people seem to be missing that the practice of that habit in yourself is really the most important factor in that equation. So yes, it's nice when you're polite to someone else, if they have feelings, they might feel good when you say please and thank you to them, and that's nice. And that helps propagate, more of that in the world. I'm all for that. I'm not trying to downplay that part, that effect, but I also want to remind us all and perhaps to some of us introduce the idea that at least as important, if not even more important, is the patterns that we're creating in ourselves, because that reverberates out like hundreds of times more often, if not thousands or millions of times more often. And it also reverberates in. And so, and again, as it reverberates in, it creates this elevated frequency that then radiates out. So we're helping to elevate the whole shebang, the whole thing when we do that for ourselves. The little simple habits of expressing gratitude and appreciation. And even though I was just talking about expressing it externally, and I do think it's worth recognizing that when you say the words, they're vibrating in your vocal cords, they're coming out, they're going back in your ears, they're vibrating into your cells. It's again like a thousandfold more powerful than just thinking the thoughts. And I know there's a whole lot of talk rhetoric out there lately about in the neuroscience community, which I love, is one of my favorite communities. I spend a lot of time there. But the notion that the brain doesn't know the difference between your thoughts and your actions is a little bit of it's a little bit of one of my pet peeves lately, because even though there are many similarities and we do, like when we measure brain waves, we can see the same patterns happening when we watch something or when we imagine something as when we do it, we still like there's still a distinction. We know there's a distinction. Um, and I guess I keep bringing that up because otherwise, VR sex would be the same as real sex, and it's not. So I just want to keep bringing that to the table because I hear people talking sometimes in a way that seems to be like washing over that. But back to the program at hand, self-love, and expressing our gratitude and appreciation out loud and internally. And now I want to kind of counter what I just said about how much more powerful it is to say things out loud. And I still think that's true. But I also think it's true that sometimes it's more powerful not to say them out loud and to just focus on that feeling internally and rev up that feeling internally. Because sometimes we just say things out loud while we're actually feeling counter to that feeling. So we might say thanks or thank you or I appreciate you to someone when we're actually struggling internally with that. And while I think it's a good practice, and I think it's good for society and good for our relationships and probably good for ourselves to practice that. I think when we get too far down that spectrum of incoherence or incongruence, it can start to create that discordance that starts to create turbulence that creates ultimately stagnation and disease in the body. So, and in societies at large. So, again, I think it's important to remember that there's not just a right and a wrong. There are spectrums where all along the way there's better and worse. There's a good direction and a bad direction from wherever you are, or perhaps there are several positive and several negative directions. And ultimately, at the same time, I don't think any direction is really all good or all bad. It's what we do with it, right? It's how we navigate. It's what we learn. It's how we bring ourselves to our various journeys, our various directions that really ultimately determines what frequency we're operating at. And then that circles back around to the main point of this rant or ramble or whatever we're calling this, which is that practicing self love in those ways of actions and words and thoughts and feelings. And, give yourself a gift now and then. Treat yourself to a day off. Give yourself a surprise. Also, give yourself that tough love sometimes and practice your self-discipline and, um, you know, don't let yourself eat too many cupcakes. Yeah, self. Um, I wanna wrap this up, but I'm looking at my notes over here to see if I've missed any key points. I guess I want to reiterate that ultimately we're all one. So when we learn to love ourselves better, we're learning to love one another better. And when we practice and learn to cultivate better practices with each other and love one another more vibrantly and more coherently, more healthily, then we are also learning to do that with our own bodies. Ultimately, I have learned a lot of times over that my own body, this body is the one thing, the one companion that I've had since the day I was born, and I will have till the day I die. And many other companions have come and gone in this lifetime already, and I expect probably more will. So it's interesting that sometimes we neglect the relationship with our own bodies for so long and so much of the time. And I implore you to give yourself the gift of developing a healthier relationship with your own body because it's really the best thing you can do for you and your life. And it's also the best thing you can do for everyone else in life, everything else in life, because as you up level your own frequency, you're gonna invite others to up level their frequency, and you're gonna create space, new awareness for others to step into with that new up-leveled self-love as well. So I'm excited about a lot of that. Remember that our brains seek to explain and make sense of things. And so if you have a default mode network that's like down here, um, and you're thinking you just can't get up here because you just don't believe it, just try it for a while. Sometimes it's as little as like 5 days or 5 tries. Sometimes it might be like 5,000 tries, but it feels better to be trying and on that journey. I can attest to that. And also those times when you do have that transformation happen, reach that new level where you go like, oh wow, I've learned a new thing. I've developed a new skill. I no longer do that thing that I used to do that limits me or gets in my own way or creates this negative effect in my life. As you start to practice and up level your skills, um, that will help draw you forward. And you might be actually really shocked and pleasantly surprised at how quickly um, you can move from that not believing that you love yourself to being astounded by how much you actually do love and appreciate yourself. And it starts by just act as if. And like I said, even if you don't fully believe it, if you can start to act as if. So do nice things for yourself and say nice things for yourself. Like like what if you adopted a child that was a really hard child, but you really like you had thought long about it, you really wanted to love that child, but it was challenging at times. This is a great analogy and a way to think about your own body because the body really is a lot like a child and it really does respond in a very basic level. And it really is challenging in many, many ways. And yet it's still worthy of your love. And it's still the most important relationship that you can learn to love and appreciate in this life. So, um, yeah, I want to mention again my book, The Shift, where I've been trying to articulate many of these tools and also give a guided, like, stepping stone path over the river of overwhelm and too many emotions so that more of us can navigate that river and come out on this side of more coherence and more healing together. Um, as we're coming into this Thanksgiving season, holiday season, I think it's an invitation to pause and really think about what's important, really think about what we appreciate about ourselves and about each other, and take a little time to express it. I've heard the expression that a appreciation unexpressed is like, oh, now I can't think of the analogy. Do you know? I think I was gonna write it down and then I didn't. Hmm. I'm so silly. Anyway, put that in the comments if you know the comment I'm thinking about. I don't know why this backgrounder keeps giving me a grill effect. Sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, again, I want to mention our wonderful sponsors, one of which is a sister to this podcast, the Authentic Action Academy. We're starting a new community over at school. Come check it out. We'll be evolving there in our natural way. And the Sleeping Dragons Company, my own creation. Been in business, gosh, I think over 30 years now, bringing you hard to find essential oils and herbs and other self-love and aesthetically pleasing supplies. So check it out at www.sleepingdragons with an S co.com. That'll take you over to our Etsy store right now. And in the future, it might take you back to our website. We'll see. Also, you can check out the description for links to those things and perhaps some affiliates and other things. We'll see how it all unfolds. I like to always remind you that you are worthy of your own unconditional love, always and always. So I hope you're giving yourself that. I hope you're getting some on ya, because life is too short and too important to take it too seriously. We'll wrap it up with the joke that I started you off with. What's the best way to make fire with two sticks? Make sure one is a match. You're welcome. Ciao for now.